So who are you? All right, so let me give you a few ideas that may or may not be on your list or what you've thought. Number one, you are an ancient spiritual being who has lived over 2 billion years. And those 2 billion, you were in the presence of deity and each other. You're a physical being now who is relearning your true identity, but you've only been trying for about 20 to 80 years. So no matter where you are on the spectrum, you're basically a rookie. Compare the 20 to 80 years against the 2 billion, and you haven't been doing this a heck of a lot of time. In other words, you prepared yourself for 2 billion years so you can come down into this thing we call, this time frame we call mortality, and there be tested, tried, and actually learn infinitely more because now you have a mortal body that's going to compromise you in so many ways. Number three, one of God's choicest spirits saved for the very last days. Now, these are the most wicked slash righteous time. We've never had a time like what we live in right now. I mean, if we were right now and there's never been a flood or there's never been a Sodom and Gomorrah, we'd probably get them both at the same time. That's how wicked we are right now, according to some of our leaders. Next, according to Abraham 3, you're one of God's co-creators who's already been making worlds without end. Wouldn't that be a cool identity to recognize when you get up in the morning? Who am I? Oh, I've already been learning the following things. Therefore, this next bullet point holds more validity than if I had just said it at the beginning. You are brilliant at math, algebra, geometry, trig, calculus, chemistry, biology, languages, history. You're an expert at learning. You're very adept at communicating, and you probably are really good at pickleball, all before you were born. Now, is that something to have an identity over? Now, just for a second, would you please just reflect? What if every bullet point on here is true? What would that be like for you? How would that feel to know that's true? In other words, my testimony to you is you're a daughter of God. There's our beginning place. That's our starting place. Now, the next question is, let's move on. What do you want? So I did a little research and I wrote down the top 5 things that people want. Number one is they want love. Now, were we to have a lot more time and were I to be in person, we would take that word apart and explain that in maybe in different terms than what the world uses it as. But be that as it may, that's the number one thing. Number two, people say is we want physical and emotional health. In other words, it isn't just to live a long time, but I want to live a long time with a quality of life associated with the quantity of life. Number three, I want to learn, I want to grow, and I want to change. Despite the fact that we recognize that people are change adverse, that's only because of, and we'll cover this, the stories they're telling themselves that aren't true. Every single one of us wants to learn, to grow, and to change because reality is couch potatoes are miserable. They're not happy because they're doing nothing. They're not happy because they're bored. They're very frustrated. So they become highly critical. I mean, they're the best referees when watching a football game. They're the ones who know all the answers to everything if you just ask them because they're trying to stop the pain that they have on the inside. Number four, want good connections with friends and family, not necessarily in that order. But it's the connections that are so critical. We are hardwired to connect, and when we don't connect, it hurts. And when we hurt, we do things that aren't healthy. And then number five, as I mentioned earlier, long life. Quality is as important as quantity. Okay, so if these are the 5 things we want, and if our identity is, as I mentioned in the previous slide, how do we go about connecting the two? How do we get what we want, and meaning this is a healthy want, and how do we start appreciating and understanding our true identity and who we are? So Awareness is the key. This is the first step in emotional intelligence. So I'm going to show you what not to do, and then I'm going to show you what to do. So number one, there's this construct called unconscious incompetence. That means someone who's unconsciously incompetent doesn't know what they don't know. And they oftentimes don't really want to know it. Um, just a real quick example, and I don't mean to disparage teenagers, especially if they're listening or watching, but so often when teenagers say things and they make decisions on things, um, and we've already been through all of that, and we can see the end before they even see the beginning. We look at them and go, "Boy, you just really don't know what you don't know." But what if that's me? What if that's us? What don't we know that if we knew would make a difference? And oftentimes the stumbling block, the stepping stones to finding happiness and joy and our identity is overcoming what we don't know. Therefore, we live in what are called behavior blind spots. They're all around us, but not knowing they're there is really challenging. The greatest place to be is a starting place called conscious incompetence, meaning I now know that I don't know. And I have a desire to learn what is I don't know. So now I have an awareness. The biggest tipping point in my marriage with my wife was a conscious incompetence of me when I started realizing that my behavior was harming the relationship, and it wasn't her or my mother-in-law or my sister-in-law after all. It was me and my unawareness, something I didn't know. So be mindful of that. It's much better to be aware that you don't know something than to think something is so, only to find out it wasn't. And this is how we do it. So this is the next one. This is number 3 on your little notes. I call it the law of perfect. Now, growing up inside of the faith here, I was taught that there's a scripture in Matthew and again in 3rd Nephi that says, "Be therefore perfect, even as God and Jesus Christ are perfect." All right, that's a beautiful scripture. But from a mortal's perspective, highly improbable, more likely highly impossible. And it always caught me a little bit off guard as to why would God give me a commandment that I clearly can't do right now? And I've researched the law of perfect or the word perfect for thousands of years, and all sorts of people and experts and brilliant people have written about it. And they all seem to, this is my opinion though, miss the mark. Now, let me bring back in a little bit of the world of psychology on perfect. What if, what if being perfect is a little bit different than the way it's being portrayed? So here's my explanation. Perfect is an experience or event that is exactly what you need at this time to come closer to God, or what's called integration. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So in other words, perfect isn't without flaw. Perfect is the process to be flawless. If God tells Richard Himmer, "Be therefore perfect, even as Christ is perfect," well, Christ wasn't without making mistakes. He probably measured a couple things wrong when he handed it to his dad in the business. And our Father in heaven, we know, had to go through the mortal process as well. What if perfect is going through that process where we make a mistake and we do a retake? We take the sacrament 48 times a year. Why? Because God accepts that we're going to make mistakes. God accepts that our identity is as a mortal, as a daughter of Him. And He accepts that we spent 2 billion years developing our true identity to come down to earth to get hit with all sorts of challenges. Our family, the way we were born, where we were born, things that happened to us outside our control. What if perfect is indeed that opportunity to, every time something hits me that I don't expect, or every time I do something that isn't exactly in harmony with the gospel, I get to do a retake and literally start over. It's like getting baptized 48 times a year. I simply go to the sacrament table and say, "Hey, here's God, a recap of my week. This is the things that I did. Here's what I'm learning. This is where I want to go." And now I get to do a retake because we learn by those mistakes. All right. Now we set that part up. I'm going to share with you just a little bit of a personal history to help set up the Woman at the Well dialogue. And keep in mind that as I share this history with you, Each of you is going to have your own similar type history. And keep in mind, I'm not saying that mine was bad, and I'm not saying mine was good. This is my history. It's exactly what I needed for me to be the best person I could be. Hmm. So at age 3, my parents got divorced. I was living in the state of Utah at the time, and we moved to California when I was 3. I was the eldest. I had a 1-year-old brother, and I had a baby sister, infant, just born. I didn't see my biological father except for maybe 5 times for the next 15 years. And in the world that I live in, that's called abandonment. So now I want you to think about this for a second. I'm 3 years old and my mom and dad get divorced. What am I telling myself about me? My dad doesn't see me, but maybe on average once every 3 years. Then they fight, and the whole time I'm with my mom and my biological mom and my grandparents, everything about my biological father is negative, very negative, and that had a huge impact on me. At age 8, my mom remarried. She married a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Himmer, career Marine officer, and within 2 years, I'm adopted and sealed in the Los Angeles Temple to Lawrence Himmer. I learned more about marriage, parenting, and leadership in the next 2 years than I will for the next 30 years on my own. Of course, I didn't know it then, but things would keep coming back to me, flashes of memories, things that my father would say, the relationship that my father had with my mother. They kept coming back to me regularly. And then as I matured and I studied, I started going, oh, he did this. Oh, that's what that meant. And this is what happened over here. And I'd contrast that with what it was like when my biological father was with my mom, and the horror and the scarred memories I have of that relationship. So there was a juxtaposition within there that was really interesting for me to ponder. And then at age 10, my father is killed, and I call him my father, in Vietnam. I'm abandoned again. Now, what's going on in the mind of a 10-year-old who cannot seem to have a man in his life or someone who cares about him, someone who loves him from the male side, and whose mother is so busy just trying to keep her life together that she doesn't have time to be with him or to talk to him. And when my father was killed at age 10, my uncle's only words of counsel to me was, "You're the man of the family now. Take care of your brother and sisters." So all I know and all they know for the rest of my life was changing diapers, going to temple or to parent teacher conferences, taking my siblings to school, doing homework with them. And basically, my lifetime as a youth, I didn't get to have. I had to become the dad. And that's all I knew for many, many years. All right, end of narrative. And now I want to give that an explanation. What you're going to see now is called the drama triangle. And in the drama triangle, there are 3 roles that we play. They're called personas. Persona is just a Greek, I think it's Greek, for your stage presence or what you're playing as. So the first role that we play in world when things don't go well is called the victim. This is where we feel like we're worthless and helpless and hopeless. Maybe we're powerless. We have a lot of self-pity, we blame ourselves, and we become very codependent. The next role we play, rescuer. This is the enabler. This is the person who's really nice, who doesn't have a boundary, who always says yes, but doesn't realize that they're saying no to all the things that they can't afford to say no to. They're constantly relating, and they don't really make friends as much as they take hostages. And they live in the world of shame. And the next role we play is persecutor. This is kind of the bully. This is someone that you're always worried to be around. You walk on eggshells because they're volatile, either emotionally or physically abusive, or they go into the man cave or the chick hut, right? They just really seclude themselves and isolate away from everyone to punish them, which is the mindset. Every single one of these roles is a way for us to medicate. So when we're playing the role of a victim, oh, poor me type thing, we're actually putting drugs into our body, and the brain can't tell the difference between let's say taking a drink of alcohol or shooting up with cocaine or playing the role of a victim or a rescuer or a persecutor. The brain doesn't know the difference. It is as vicious an addiction as anything we have in society. Now, what I've done here is what I just shared with you has been around for a lot of years. On the left-hand side is how I do an overlay over it to help me understand what's going on. When I'm talking to somebody, I need to give a name to their behavior and to their energy. So let's say you get a phone call from a friend and he or she's kind of having a rough day and they start telling you a story that's going on. Well, the first thing I do when I hear someone telling me the story is I ask, where's their focus? Are they focused on the solution or is their focus on the problem? And if their focus is on the solution, that means the energy is going to be such that we can talk back and forth and we're looking to grow. We're looking from the mistake to do a retake. All right. However, if their focus is on the problem, then the next two things are probably going to happen as well. Where's their energy? Are they in acceptance or are they in resistance? And what you resist persists. So, in other words, in resistance, the person has to be right. And they double down, they dig their heels in because they have to be right because they feel that they've been wronged or they've been offended. And so they're going to move into that victim's position. And from the victim's position, they'll lash out either in the form of persecuting or they'll move into that rescuer position. So it always goes through the first persona of victim, and then they'll go into the rescuer or persecutor. And then the last position is, are they neutral in telling me the story, or is there a bias? And if there's a bias, that means somebody's right and somebody's wrong with an attitude. Now, that doesn't mean someone isn't right and someone isn't wrong. I don't mean that at all. But you can explain things by principle and from a position of neutrality. So this has helped me immensely, especially with me. So if I go into the pity party for me because I feel I've been wronged, it's very clear where I'm going on the left side. I'm going to focus my energy on the problem. I'm going to be in total resistance to what's going on. And I'm going to have a bias about what just happened. And I want people to know that my bias is correct, that there's a problem here because I'm in resistance. Therefore, I'm going to play the victim and I'm going to try to garner support from my victimhood. So hopefully that makes sense. And I went over that kind of rapidly. But boy, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So not too long ago, I read the following quote on what you're looking at right here. So James Clear, he's the author of Atomic Habits, said, don't spend too much time around someone whose primary way of engaging with life is as a martyr. When suffering becomes your identity, you only see the hard parts of life. Now, could we just reflect for a second? What if that slide I talked about you as a daughter of God, creating worlds without end, having this amazing knowledge, rubbing shoulders with deity and angels and great people for 2 billion years? What if that's all true? Then if that's true, that means everything that's hard for us in life, all the challenges that get thrown our way, is perfect. Exactly what we need at this time for us to come closer to God and to integrate our upstairs and downstairs brains. That's a whole different way of looking at it. Feel the energy in your heart right now. Is that not a unique way of having that approaching difficult things? In other words, when we don't do it, we're in that unconscious incompetence mode. When we can look at that and say, oh, this is hard. It's exactly what I need. I get to move forward. I'm now at conscious incompetence. And the next step I get is conscious competence. And I start moving myself closer to my true identity and who I really want to be. All right. In this next set of slides, I'm going to walk through the clip idea. Now, this is basically our entire life from in utero until now, broken down into different component parts that explain why we are who we are. At the time of conception, which is in utero, at the time of conception, we are a sentient being and we have feelings and we start remembering things at the cellular level. So if mom and dad are in conflict while we're in utero, we're going to take that internally. We hear everything through the umbilical cord, like Dolby surround sound from our mother, and we feel everything she feels. All of the drugs that she creates internally, we also get. Some babies are literally born addicted to certain drugs because mom has had so much trauma and stress within her. So, depending on what happens in the first years of life, how we connect has a huge impact on other things. For example, on how we learn. Remember, what are the five things people want? Connecting is one of them, and learning is another one of them. And then, depending on how we connect and how we learn, will dictate our identity, and that identity dictates our purpose. So, here's how it's broken down. If we have a healthy connection early on in life, and I'm talking from in utero through 2 or 3 years of age, we will become a lifelong learner. We will learn for the sake of learning, and we will master the law of perfect. When we make mistakes, we'll get retakes. When we learn something, we put it into practice. The unconnected learner is those who are ever learning but never coming to the knowledge and the practice of the truth. Many of the people, clients that I've spoken to over the years are far better learned than I am and better read. The challenge is they can't connect the dots. They can't apply the knowledge. Perhaps you've heard the term or the saying, knowledge is power. I beg to differ. What good does knowledge do if you don't apply it? How many people know they shouldn't be eating fast food, but they do? So, how good is the knowledge? Applied knowledge is power. Applied knowledge is really wisdom. Okay. Next, if I become a lifelong learner, I start recognizing my true identity or my authentic self. If I don't, if I'm the unconnected learner, my false self dictates my behavior. And now in our faith, we use the term the natural man. The natural man is an enemy to God or your false self. It's the one telling you things about yourself that are not true. Let me give you just a quick example. I just did a whole slide on who you are as a daughter of God. Now, many of you, some of you, might have felt a little uncomfortable. Your stomach probably said, no, no, that's not true. That's not really who I am. That's self-talk, and that's your false self. That's the natural man talking to you and telling you that can't be true. Now, in a couple slides, I'm going to show you exactly how that happens. So when it does happen in the future, here's your technique. This is a second half of life skill set. When you start hearing yourself telling yourself things that aren't true about who you are, so I've set the bar that you're a daughter of God with all the associated bullet points that we had. But when you feel or sense, and this, oh, I'm just not that good. No, that's not really who I am. No, I really can't do that. And I don't deserve that. The quickest thing you can do is to preface everything with an if. What if I am a daughter? Not was, present tense. What if I am a daughter of God? What if I really am that intelligent? What if I really can do something? I'm telling you, sisters, right now, of all the things I've said so far, if you start practicing the what if, every time you catch yourself kind of beating yourself up, and everybody does it, I mean, no one's immune. If you just start practicing, what if I really am a daughter? What if I really am this? It will have an immediate impact because you are compounding the negativity into yourself over and over. Let's reverse engineer that whole thing. Purpose. If your identity is truly as a daughter of God, then you live a principle-based life. If you do have a false identity, who you really are, your bias distorts your purpose of life. And you start going down roads that are not safe. They're dark, they're dismal, and they're gloomy. There is no happiness with a distorted bias. And then you become that person who plays the role of a victim so often. With a principle-based approach, you have a high probability of experiencing happiness, joy, and well-being. With a distorted bias, you're back into the drama triangle and you're in a circular, almost unending process of going down this thing. And it doesn't get better if you don't do anything. Addictions don't get better by leaving them alone or burying them in the sand. The only way improvement can be made is to go back and start discovering your true self. Start the, well, what if practice and start connecting with your Father in heaven. We'll have a little bit of time to cover that today. All right. Now, years and years ago, Stephen Covey wrote the book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that book, he taught us the dependency cycle. At least that's the first place I ever saw it. The only thing I'm going to change in the dependency cycle is the very first one, which Dr. Covey didn't have this knowledge. Nobody did at the time of writing the book. And that's how the neuropsychology of how the brain works. So I want to share a little bit different approach on being dependent. So there's dependent, independent, interdependent. Being dependent is the starting place. It's not an addiction. Codependency is the addiction. Being dependent means you attach and accept your community. Okay, now go back in my story. Up until age 3, I did not attach and accept my community. My community is mother, father, parents. So my mom's present physically, and she loved me the best she could. But emotionally, she was fighting some pretty mean dragons. My father, physically and emotionally, gone. So I have one attachment completely checked off. It's X'd out. And then as parents, as a unit, single unit, that one's X'd out because they're divorced. So I'm 1 for 3 at best growing up until age 3. Independent is the ability to stand alone, to live in a world of acceptance, remember in the drama triangle, and to have a healthy identity. And that last word is critical. It's additive. I start at dependent. And as I learn these skills, I add to them into me. So I go from first half to second half in my emotional maturity, and it's additive. So eventually I can move to what is called interdependence, to assimilate into a community and to create synergy where 2 + 2 = 5. This is eternal marriage, for example. This is the families. This is councils. We're always better collectively and collaboratively than we are in competition against each other and dividing ourselves up. So interdependence is the epitome of godlike living. That's perfect personified, where we're getting to the point where we're practicing the things that we've been taught and we've done. So going back, dependent, community, mother, father, grandparents. To attach someone means to trust, have trust and respect, and to receive affirmation, affection, and approval. And to accept means I can move to neutral energy, I have boundaries, and I have a clear identity. Now, that's what it means to, when you're dependent, that you're supposed to attach and accept your community. That's the definition. Now, what happens when we do and what happens when we don't? When we do, we move to the lifelong learner, we move to a healthy identity, and we move to a real clear purpose. But when we don't, we have to medicate the pain that we're in because we don't feel good about the situation. So we move to what are called endogenous addictive behavior, which means it comes from the inside. So codependence, anger, isolation, victimhood are all endogenous type addictions. Now, there's a whole host of them. I just wanted to give you a smattering to understand. But the other kind of addiction is what most people see as addiction, and it's not the most prevalent. So exogenous is outside in. So alcohol, illicit drugs, smoking, things of that nature. And anymore today, it's energy drinks, diet drinks. One of the biggest challenges I have when I'm coaching people is to get them off their Diet Coke or their Diet Dr. Pepper. It's amazing the consequences the body goes through drinking that carbonated drink. Okay, so I've explained kind of what happens. And if you'll notice a little bit how important that first part of life is, but here's something just to consider for a second. Almost no one that I've ever met gets through the first half of life without some kind of trauma. I've had so many people say, no, I had a great childhood. Mom and dad are great, only to be so beset by things that they are not aware that happened to them, that were subtle and they were young when they happened. So all of us have challenges. That's why we're here on earth. So on this one, I just want to explain a little bit about the brains, and this is number 8 on the critical faculty. So your conscious is the outside, the cognitive part. This is your reasonable and your rational. The subconscious is what's termed as the emotional part. Now, that's a little bit true, but I want you to notice the numbers. We really operate only about 5 to 10% with our cognitive, our conscious. However, 90 to 95% of who we are is done at the subconscious level. So just for a minute, if those numbers are accurate, where do you want to put your greatest strengths? And who's going to win in a fight between the conscious and the subconscious if push comes to shove? So here's what our conscious does. It's the rational and analytical, your temporary memory, your values, and your willpower. The permanent memory is within the subconscious. Everything that's ever happened to you from conception on is stored within your memory. Now, there's more to it than this, but that's where we're going to go. Now, right around in the cognitive area, you'll see that dotted line, somewhat orangish, reddish. That's called your critical faculty. Everything that ever happens to you has to pass through the critical faculty. And what it does is it automatically goes to your permanent memory and it says, hey, what do you know about that? And if there's nothing written on your hard drive, it's going to say, I don't know anything about that piece of information. Well, go ahead and let that come in. So whatever it is, that experience, a thought, an idea will come in through your critical faculty because there's no filter stopping it. Let me give you an example of how that works. All right, let's pretend that you're the little 3-year-old with the balloon. And grandpa comes up to you and says, hey, honey, I want to teach you something because our family, we're really good in a lot of things. And one of the things we're good in is our shapes. So he says to you, I want you to know this is how it works. You see this right here, honey? That's a triangle. And you see this over here? That's a square. Now, I already know that many of you have already turned in your stomachs or something feels really uncomfortable to you because you automatically see what's going on here. So I'm going to stop for a second. I want you to think back to my childhood. Before I'm 3, I've already lost my dad, and my mom is already fighting her own battles. So really, I've lost both mom, dad, and parents. What do you think I'm telling myself about me? What's my identity? Who am I in the world? In other words, because of the trauma that I had at that age, I started telling myself things that the false self, the natural man, wanted to capitalize on. They weren't true, but it was a way that the subconscious works to protect me from pain. So I had a false narrative about me because I got taught that that figure on your left is a triangle and the figure on the right is a square. Now, what happens when I'm in the 3rd grade and I go to school and the teacher says, oh, by the way, boys and girls, that figure here is a square and this figure here is a triangle. In that moment, that's called confusion. And that's what happens when truth gets told to us after years of a false narrative. Perhaps you've had the experience sharing a truth with somebody and they've always believed it differently. Or maybe that's happened to you. And it takes a while to process. Well, how is that possibly true? That's because you've only seen it the same way for most of your life. That's how the critical faculty works. Because as soon as the teacher said, oh, it's the other way around, it hit your critical faculty and that data came to it and said, well, what do you know about this square figure? Well, I'm telling you what it accurately was. And the critical faculty will do a deep search into the permanent memory and will say, oh, we call that a triangle. And yet the teacher's calling it a square. Hence the confusion. So back to our little story here. You see how the critical faculty is playing a role. Everything that coming at you has to pass through that. And if your memory already is that you're not good enough, that you don't deserve, that you have no worth, then you're going to behave according to the false narratives that you're telling yourself. But here's where the hope resides. That subconscious that I said has 90% of who you are and the power is all of your power. It's where healing comes, it's where change can be made. Now, it doesn't judge, and just a quick understanding. Remember that false narrative that says that you're not good enough, or I was telling myself that? Well, I have to I have to follow that false narrative until I'm aware that it's false. That's why a unconsciously incompetent person doesn't know what they don't know, because I'm still not aware that I have that false narrative. And when I become aware of it, I can start healing. In the subconscious is your imagination. This is how we communicate with God, and this is how we start the healing process. Already mentioned the permanent memory. I did mention the emotions, and this is where the self-preservation aspect comes from. So you have two ways to self-preserve, either through your false self, what we call the natural man, or your authentic self. This is who you are. That's your true identity. This is how God sees you. All right. Hopefully you've got that baseline. Now, let's move to what was my narrative. So it's interesting as I went through this process, I would get bits and pieces of my narrative over the years. And as I started collecting these bits and pieces, they all came as a shock, and they all came, it was painful when they started coming. So here's the first narrative that I came up with. I used to believe at the subconscious level, and didn't know it, that I'm not good enough. As a matter of fact, it manifested itself in my marriage because I didn't believe I deserved to have healthy relationships. Let me take my story just a little bit further. So my mom's first marriage ended because she was abused in every way you can think of. Then she gets married again, and he's killed in a war. And then she gets married two more times, and they end in divorce. So in other words, all I know is that men as parental units don't work out for me because I don't have any worth. I'm not good enough, and I don't deserve. As a matter of fact, I can't trust men. I especially can't trust fathers. And to further that, church leaders are men and they can't be judged. They can't be trusted. And frankly, as I've got story after story to explain how judging they are of me. And remember, I talked about that false self looks for ways to be wrong, looks for ways to make it harder. And then I had this belief that church leaders don't care about me and they don't trust me. Now, that's a rough life to go through from my perspective, right? So here's my justification. At age 12, I had no scout leader. As a matter of fact, for 2 years, I never had a scout leader. I was the leader of the youth. I organized all of the outings. I organized every single mutual night, going back to days of mutual during the week. Um, and so I thought, well, this is pretty normal. There's no man in my home, and there's no man in my leader in my scout outfit. At age 16, I was constantly singled out. Again, no leaders. We didn't have anyone who was taking care of us. And in Sunday school, I was constantly getting kicked out of Sunday school. Now, I don't have time to explain the story to you. From my perspective, I'm very justified in saying I don't really think I did anything. Of course, the Sunday school teacher would have had a different opinion. But remember, I'm telling myself a story. So to me, it's amplified, it's made or magnified. And so to me, every single age group, from the minute I moved into Scouts until I left home at age 17, everything pointed to the fact that I have no worth, I'm not good enough, men can't be trusted. That's my narrative. All right. So I'm transitioning now, and I'm setting this up so we can get to the woman at the well. The construct we want to work with is called emotional intelligence. So I'll give you a little chance to grab your breath as we move into this. Emotional intelligence is the ability to identify, assess, and control your emotions and be aware of the emotions of others. So I'm looking at myself. Emotional intelligence and Richard Himmer did not share space. We had a very adversarial relationship, if you will, because I didn't know what I didn't know. The pathway to learning who I was, my identity, didn't happen until I was into my 40s. After 20 years of marriage, the healing started going. How my wife kept up with me, let me stay in the home, loved me, is still a puzzle to this day. So I'm going to transition now into um, the dialogue here. And what I'm going to do, and Sherry's going to come up and join me here, we're going to go over a little bit of the narrative, and then I'm stopping the narrative, and we're going to make sense of what just happened in that story. So let me set up the woman at the well. And again, I'm going back to the uh, the movie or the film The Chosen, and this is a scene right out of The Chosen. What was cool about this is Sherry and I were preparing this some months ago. We got thinking this would be a great way to illustrate it. And so Sherry wrote down word for word the dialogue, and I went behind her, compared it to the scriptures to make sure everything was in sync. And then I put together the psychology of what just happened in this moment. All right. So actually, would you just read the narrative a little bit here? So this is my wife, Sherry.
Hello, sisters. It's great to be with you tonight. So here we are with the story of the woman at the well. Outside the city walls of Samaria, Jesus sits down at Jacob's well. A Samaritan woman approaches the well with empty water vessels or jugs and starts to fill them with water. So who are the Samaritans? In 722, the Syrians attacked Israel and separated 10 tribes of the northern kingdom from the southern kingdom. Most of the Israelites were transported north to Assyria and lost. Those that remained were mixed with conquered people from various nations.
And that's 722 BC. I apologize, I didn't get that in there.
They intermixed and became the Samaritans, part of Israel, or part Israeli and part heathen, or part Jewish, but not whole. This created a gulf between them and the remaining Jews. They were considered apostate.
And they were hated. There's vitriolic feelings between the two sides. Okay, we're going to do the narrative now. So picture the Christ is at the well. The Samaritan woman walks up. Would you give me a drink? Did you hear me?
Well, that's bad. You, a Jew, to get a drink from a Samaritan woman.
I'm sorry. I should have said please.
You know, it's not safe for you to be alone out here.
Nor you. Why haven't you come with the others? And why so late in the day? Don't women come to the well in the cool of the morning?
Yeah, well, none of them will be seen with me, so I have to come at noon in the heat, as you have so kindly reminded me.
Why won't they be seen with you?
Long story.
I'd still like a drink if you can spare it.
Amazing what a parched throat will do. Aren't I unclean to you? Won't you be defiled by this vessel?
Maybe some of my people say that about your women, but I don't. Okay, pause in the action. Let's go to the drama triangle. Now, what I want you to do is, first of all, on the left-hand side, go to focus. Is she solution-based or is she problem-based? Is she in acceptance of the situation or is she in resistance? Is she neutral about it or is she biased? So what's going on here? What role is she playing? Is she playing the role of a victim? Is she feeling worthless, helpless, hopeless, powerless, self-pity, don't deserve, codependent? So this is where you start learning how to give a name to a behavior instead of judging the person. We are not in a position to judge. Thou shalt not judge. And I'm arguing this is judging when we say, oh, she's just being mean or she's being a victim. Well, no, she's playing the role of a victim. What she's doing is she's fighting something ugly inside of her that she wants out because she doesn't know her own identity. Anything else you want to say on that one? Okay. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. We're going to continue. And I want you to just, every time you hear her say something or the Savior say something, start asking yourself, what's going on there? What's behind, what's underlying this vitriol or this anger or whatever it might be? Okay.
Yeah. And what do you say?
I say if you knew who I am, you'd be asking me for a drink,
Really?
and I'd give you living water.
Would, except you have nothing to draw water with. And this is a deep well. Besides, what do you need from me if you have your own supply of living water?
Now we're going to flip forward a little bit because he's going to go a long story. But what's going on here? Do you see how everything she's saying is negative?
And very resistant.
Total resistance and not willing to even have a healthy dialogue with a stranger who's being very kind to her. So now let me explain the neuropsychology on this one. All right. So this is a model of the brains. If you picture the fingers up there, if you were to hold your hand up and wiggle your fingers, you'd get an idea. That's your cerebral cortex, your cognitive. Below that is your subconscious, which is made up of the amygdala, thalamus, and hippocampus, and then the brainstem, which regulates your body brains. And your body brains are the heart, lungs, kidneys, liver, digestive tract, and genitals. That's your subconscious from the amygdala down. The way it's supposed to work when everything is going well. If I don't know if you guys can see me, but if you were to take your hand, cross your thumb over it, and then bring your fingers over the thumb, that is an integrated brain. That's how it's supposed to work. When things aren't going well, we flip our lids and our brains go like this. And so we become fragmented and we're out of our heads and we don't even think rationally. This is integrated. So the entire purpose behind perfect is so we can live a life. So perfect is an experience or an event that's exactly what I need right now so I can be integrated, so I can come closer to God. And when I go into resistance, when I play the role of a victim, I go like this because I start medicating. And that's all that's happening in the body. And I'd go into detail on if you wanted to have a little fun, look at the amygdala, thalamus, and hippocampus and see they all play a role on how we flip and how we don't flip. All right. Here we go. We're picking it up again.
And Jewish water is better water than Samaritan water. Are you a better man than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well?
I know Jacob, and everyone who drinks this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks the water that I give them will never be thirsty again.
Wouldn't that be nice?
The water I give will become in a person a spring of water, welling up to eternal life.
Really?
Yes, really. Okay, notice the energy. So let's explain this. Okay, go back to the story that I told you about myself. In my experience, and I've got thousands of these experiences to explain it, here are 8 narratives that people can go through when they start talking to themselves that are not true. So I'm going to read these to you and just pay attention to how you feel when I say them. Because sometimes when I do this, you're going to go, oh man, that's what I do. That's what I'm feeling. That's what I think about myself. So number 1, I have no worth. It's my fault. I'm not lovable. I can't have emotional intimacy with people or what is called mutual trust and respect. And for what it's worth, that was a big one for me, especially with men. I don't deserve. I don't deserve a happy marriage with Sherry. That was tough. I can never be safe. Well, I couldn't be at church, I can tell you that. I'm powerless, helpless, and hopeless. And to me, especially in church. And I'm not good enough because I'm not good enough to have a dad. Now, what I've done over the years, and I've spent hundreds of hours trying to figure this out. You guys have heard what a cognitive distortion is, right? It's when you say something that cognitively isn't logical. Well, these are 10 cognitive distortions that are precursors or tells for someone having a false narrative. So when I hear people in this world of cognitive distortions, then I've got to tell something's going on in their life that isn't healthy. So emotional reasoning, where there's no logic to it, or they're mind reading. They're trying to tell you what you're thinking, or they're predicting the future, or everything in the future based upon what might happen is terrible, called catastrophizing. Or they give labels to things. So you're a this and you're a that, or they're a this or they're a that. Boy, this is politics all over, isn't it? overgeneralizing, a negative bias. You ever met someone who can never think of anything positive? Everything they see has a negative slant to it. Any positive things that are possibly there, they're discounted. And this is a big one. This is a have to be right. In other words, they're not interested in what is right. They're not interested in the principle. They're just interested that they're right. And this is a big one societally. You've heard of political correctness. We have a societal addiction in this idea that there's a badge of honor waiting for you if you're offended. Being offended means you have a false narrative, means you don't have a clear identity, which means you've lost your purpose. Easily offended is a severe addiction. It's a communication blind spot, and it's a you don't know what you don't know scenario moving forward. So this is over all these years now, I started putting together things and I came up with my identity statement. And it's been time tested now for 25 years. It's very powerful. And I want you just to pay attention to the meaning behind this. So just let it absorb for a second. I am of worth. Well, who am I? In my case, I'm a son of God. In your case, you're a daughter of God. You were with God for 2 billion years. I own my happiness, joy, and well being. I know that I'm in charge of that. And if I own it, then I don't need to give permission for someone else's thought processes or behaviors to control me. So, just for what it's worth, give that some thought and ask yourself when you have a bad day, what if I am of worth? What if I am in control? What if I don't have to give it to someone else? What would that be like if I had worth and I'm in charge of my own happiness? Okay, we're going to continue. First, go and call your husband and then come back. I will show you both.
I have no husband.
You're right. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband.
I see you're a prophet. You're here to preach to me. Usually, the one good thing about coming here alone is I can escape from being condemned. I've made mistakes, but it's men like you who've made it impossible for me to do anything about it.
Okay, do you guys hear the victim modality? So she's playing that role. Then she's going into the persecutor modality. So she has to then, because she's in pain, she's having to medicate. And the medication process is when she's going on the attack. First of all, she doesn't feel like she has any worth. And then she has to draw him down and attack men as a whole because they're the ones who are responsible for her misery. How?
Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews insist Jerusalem is the only place for true worship.
They say that because the temple is there.
Yeah, exactly where we're not allowed.
I'm here to break those barriers. And the time is coming when you won't need to worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem.
So, where am I supposed to go when I need God? I've never received anything from God, but I couldn't thank Him even if I did.
Okay, what are you saying to yourself? What is she doing? Okay, where is she on the drama triangle? What role is she playing? Where's her focus? Where's her energy? And where's her position? What I'm hoping, sisters, is that you can start giving it a name so you can stabilize what's going on here. Slow down people who are in pain. Because if you can listen by slowing it down, you can then be your own version of a savior on Mount Zion. Okay, so we continue. Anywhere, God is spirit. And the time is coming and is now where it won't matter where you worship, but that you do it in spirit and truth, heart and mind. That is the kind of worshiper he's looking for. It won't matter where you are from or what you've done. Do you believe what I am saying?
Until the Messiah comes and explains everything and sorts this mess out, including me, I don't trust anyone.
You are wrong when you say that you've never received anything from God. The Messiah you speak of, I am he. Your first husband was named Raman. You were a woman of purity who was excited to be married, but he wasn't a good man. He hurt you and made you question marriage and even the practice of your faith.
Stop it.
The second one was Farzad. On your wedding night, his skin smelled like oranges. And now every day when you pass oranges in the marketplace, you feel guilty for leaving him because he was the only one truly godly man you've been with, but you felt unworthy.
Why are you doing this?
I have not revealed myself to the public as the Messiah. You are the first. It would be good if you believed me.
You picked the wrong person.
I came to Samaria just to meet you. Do you think it is an accident that I'm here in the middle of the day?
I am rejected by others.
I know, but not the Messiah. Now go here. Sisters, do you see the power of that statement? Do you see where she went into that total victim trap? Where she was the one telling herself the narratives that were not true? Anytime the false narrative comes out, that's the natural man. It suppresses the reality of our true identity. Having the awareness of your true identity can change the entire trajectory and the narrative of who you are. So as we finish this up, I'm going to go ahead and change out of the slide here, baby. So our testimony to you as we move forward is that you truly are, you have divinity within you. You're daughters of God. You have the ability to rise above the fray of the world around you. The testimony is that you actually do have worth, that you own your happiness, joy, and well being, that you can be better than you are today, a little bit at a time, each and every day. So at this point in time, as we wrap this up, if you have any questions, now's a good time. And if not, that's just okay. I can't hear anything if you're saying it aloud.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is grab a microphone to take down.
Okay.
1 second here. Okay.
What were the last three cognitive distortions?
Oh, sure. Discount positives, have to be right, easily offended. I can bring it up if everyone wants to, if that would help. I just need it. I can see you right now. So if it helps to bring it up, I can put it back on screen. Okay, no head nods. All right.
There should be one coming through on text. In the
Yeah, I'm
meantime,
looking for
one
that.
more.
Oh, here it is. Okay, the question is, how does grief work in this frame of reference? Sometimes it's not my narrative that stops me, but my grief. When grief becomes overwhelming that consumes you, it is your narrative. Grief is a normal response, right? We all grieve. But when grief becomes suffering, it's not healthy. Pain and suffering are two different things. Pain is a learning experience. Suffering is when you take pain to be all absorbed by that pain. Yeah, that becomes grieving, then becomes the identity, and so does suffering. That's not what it's designed to do. Christ did the suffering. That's why they call him the suffering servant. He did that so we don't have to go to the identity of a sufferer. So grieve is great. You're going to hurt. Um, you know, losing a dad isn't the easiest thing in the world, and I'm sure everyone has their own death story. But when you process it through, and that's why having an awareness of what it is gives you permission to process. Let me explain processing real quick. You guys have probably heard the term forgive and forget before. But one thing we don't do very well is explain what that really means. So just briefly, to forgive someone is the purpose behind forgiving is for you, not for them. You're not a better person because you walk up to someone and say, hey, by the way, I forgive you for your trespass. That's called piety. That's a false, it's actually an addictive behavior to try to make yourself better than you are. Nobody needs to know that you've forgiven them, and nobody really cares. You forgive the other person so you don't carry that negative weight within you and it doesn't drag you down. So forgiveness, you do for yourself. Forget. Let me explain this. You can never forget the experience. It will never happen. So when someone says, just forget about it, don't worry about it, they don't know how the brain works. You will remember everything that's ever happened to you from in utero on. You just do. But what you can do is forget the pain associated with the trauma. That's a huge difference. As long as you're holding on to the pain, it's going to be suffering. That's where grief comes in, where you take it to the identity level. You have the ability to separate the memory of the pain with the memory of the event. And that's where the atonement comes in. You give to Christ the memory of the pain. That's what Gethsemane and Golgotha were all about. When you can give Christ the pain, keep the memory and make it perfect. Learn from the memory, and you don't have to live a life of identity that you're suffering and you're grieving. For example, how many people have you met before who've been divorced for 15 years and they're still lamenting and lambasting their previous spouse? That's suffering. That's their identity. They're living in the state of victimhood and they're not processing the pain because they're making it grief. I hope you understand the difference between the two. You are not required to live in a state of grief. It's for what it's worth, and this is where acceptance and identity comes in. Researchers have found that the happiest people on earth are those terminal cancer patients who've come to grips with their situation. They live in total acceptance. They're very happy people. Isn't that cool? So it's possible to get past that. See, I think I got another one. Someone asked if I could explain integration again. Integration with upstairs and downstairs brain simply means, so my cognitive, let's say I'm an alcoholic for argument's sake. I'm an alcoholic and I want to stop. My goal is to stop my addiction. And so I cognitively say, I'm doing this. I'm not going to drink again. My wife has said if I drink again, she's kicking me out of the house. So I'm definitely going to do it. Now, my cognitive is reasonable, rational, logical, has temporary short-term memory. And so I go for 2 or 3 weeks and I'm doing great. I don't have any problems. And all of a sudden, my boss gives me a bad time. I get in a car accident and my wife gets frustrated at me because I didn't take the garbage out. I have all these things coming at me at once. And I'm frustrated and I'm in pain. Now, remember I said the subconscious doesn't know how to judge. It only knows how to act. My subconscious knows how to stop me from having pain. That's what its role is. It looks out. This is what the thalamus does. It looks out and it says, okay, what's going on in your world around you, Richard? Oh, you've got all this negativity coming at you. You're starting to feel a lot of pain. And my job is to stop you from having pain. So I'm going to help you medicate. You've got roughly 10 minutes to medicate, Richard, or I'll medicate for you. Now, the angel on my right shoulder is saying, no, just hold the line, stay cool. You're your best self right now. Don't act out. Stay the line. But my devil on this side says, you got 5 minutes now. And if you don't stop the pain, we're going to take a drink of alcohol because that stops the pain on a temporary basis. Now, who do you think is going to win? The 90% devil on my left shoulder or the 10% angel on my right shoulder when push comes to shove and I don't have an alternative and my identity is I'm not good enough? That's suffering. That's addiction. So I'm not integrated. My cognitive and my subconscious are not on the same page. So an integration means I need to get my subconscious working in harmony with my conscious, so we have alternative plans moving forward that we pre-plan in advance, so we don't move to what's called a flood, where we go to fight or flight. Because when I drink that alcohol, I'm going to fight or flight. I'm having to medicate the pain. And that's what people do when they're grieving eternally. And when they're suffering, they go to that pain position and then they tell everybody about their pain. Nobody will go into grief and just hold it themselves unless they're isolated up in the mountains. They always share that pain with other people. They love to share the misery. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Any other questions, sisters?
I had a sorry, I had a question. You talked about with the woman on the well, slowing down the narrative and the conversation taking place when somebody is going into the drama triangle to kind of like be able to come in and act as a savior for them. Can you talk a little bit more about what that might look like?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, let's start with the obvious. You've had friends before, and I use that term loosely, who will come to you because you're a sweet soul or a nice person, and they love to complain to you about their problems. Every ward will have the perennial complainer, the someone who's in a lot of pain, and they will find a kind heart, right, a nice ear, and they'll bend their ear. Well, you remember the commercial that says, "Friends don't let friends drive drunk." Well, the reality is, friends don't let friends vent. Venting is an addiction, and it's a horrible addiction. And it's so ugly. The energy around venting is so ugly to be around because the person's playing the role of a victim. And when they vent, oftentimes they'll be a rescuer and or a persecutor. It's learning the social skills, the emotional intelligence skills to redirect the energy of venting into solving. Because what's a vent, right? Isn't the vent, okay, remember the drama triangle? And we had on the left-hand side, we had the focus is it's solution or problem based. Well, a venter is all problem based, right? And energy is all resistance. And the position is completely biased. So the skill set of being a true friend is bringing them back to solution based. Something to the effect, and let's just say it's a dear friend of yours and her name is Mary. And you say, "Mary, you shared this with me last time and it was really painful then. I can see you're in a lot of pain now." That's called connect, right? You're not making her feel bad. You're not telling her she's a bad person. There's no judgment there. It says, and it seems to me that you really want to get this solved so you don't have that pain anymore. Is that right? And she's going to go, "Well, yes." Says, "Well, what have you done different since the last time up until now that's helping you to get to where you want to go?" In other words, give them an out so they can process through. And when you do that, you just interrupted the fight or flight mechanism in their brain because now they have to bring the cognitive into play. It interrupts that narrative going to the fight or flight, which is what they get all their drugs from, the dopamine or the adrenaline and the norepinephrine and the testosterone and the cortisol. Those are the three drugs that you get when you're in that addictive cycle. And it's just like shooting up with cocaine or taking a shot of vodka. The brain can't tell the difference between the two drugs. So they're venting right now, right? They're in a tremendous amount of pain. They're not bad people. They're trying to cope with something that they haven't got the skill set yet. You come in as a true saint, a true savior, and say, "I heard what you say. It doesn't sound like it's very fun. Is that right?" And they go, "Yes." Now they're interfacing with you. And then it seems to me that you'd want to stop that pain and get off that and start moving over here. If I read that right, they go, "Yeah, that's what I really want to do." Oh, well, what have you done lately that's going to get you in that direction? And they might say, because now you've interrupted them, they're talking, so you've already got a success. They might say, "I'm at a loss. That's why I'm talking to you. I don't know what to do." And at that point in time, they have a conscious incompetence. That's where healing starts. And then you can simply say, "Okay, let's think about that. Let's go over again what we want to accomplish." And notice how I went to the question instead of giving a solution. Because if you go into rescuer mode, you just set yourself up for failure because they're going to become codependent on all your answers. And no matter what you do, they won't be able to do. And you'll be the next person who's getting persecuted because you didn't give them the right answer. Well, I tried everything you said and it didn't work. You don't want to go there. So you simply said, well, what can we do moving forward? Let's have some ideas. And then they'll come up with something. And you say, what role do you want me to play? Notice how in the entire time, all you were doing was giving them love and inviting them to growth, giving them love and inviting them to growth. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. At no time did Jesus tell her what she had to do. He didn't say, you're a Samaritan, you've been looked down, and you've been sinning and living in adultery. You need to get your act together. At no time did he do that. It was complete love, compassion, and invitation. That's why friends don't let other friends talk drunk or play the role of a victim, vent, loop. Those are incredibly harmful behaviors. So, sorry, I got going a little bit on that one.
Other questions? I think we're out.
All right, sisters. That was sure a lot of fun. Thank you very much. I hope it was beneficial for you.
Oh, one more question. I'm sorry.
Is there some place that we can get what you presented to us, either watching a video of what you did tonight, or anywhere we can purchase this? I tried to write as fast as I could. I feel like I missed a lot.
Oh, well, a couple of ideas that I have. I've recorded it. I just don't know if it'll work. So we'll see if it works. I have no problem sharing the recording with you. Two, I've got a book out that goes over maybe 60 to 70% of the material. And then I can give you some books to read, just resources that will help you. So one would be a book called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. Safe for me to say that because I'm not selling my own wares now. So that'd be a good place to start. Another book is by Daniel Siegel called Mind Sight. And then my book, Listen and Lead. And then if the recording works, I'll send it to Janice and I'll have Janice forward it to you. What it would help me though, if you don't mind, I'm going to take the recording off if I can find it. Everything moved there.